Welcome to the Digital Government Podcast. Tune in to discover the future of governance and ways of getting there.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Digital Government Podcast with your usual host, Federico Plantera, journalist, sociologist, and researcher, today hosting one of the speakers that will be present at the upcoming e-governance conference 2024 of May, and also one of our keynote speakers. So Lou Down is here with us. And Lou, thanks a lot for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
A little introduction is definitely due about Lou, because Lou is the author of Good Services, a best-selling book on how to design services that work. And consequentially, they are also the founding director of the School of Good Services. Why Good Services? Because Lou, as well, was the former director of design at the UK government, where essentially they, as we may say, founded the discipline of service design, in the sense that at some point there was a 2,000 strong team of designers that were working on this discipline exactly. And at the same time, what happens is that this led to the award of design awards and also of the D&AD Lifetime Achievement Award. So, Lou, a pleasure for me to be here with you and to host you. And at the same time, what I would like to ask you is, we should start from the very beginning. So, Good Services. You have worked with and you have partnered with many organizations, like small, medium-sized, large ones. I could mention, for example, the NHS. I could mention also other ones like Netflix or Uber, the Open University. Tell us more. What is essentially like a good service in a nutshell, a little bit, if we may summarize it that way?
So a good service is essentially good for users who want to use it to reach an outcome. It's good for the organization who also want to deliver an outcome that they're trying to get to. And it's also good for society and the planet more widely. And I think sometimes when we talk about what makes a good service, we only focus on either the user experience or on the organization's outcomes. We don't necessarily think holistically about what we mean by a good service and how interlinked all of those different things are. So the reason why I ended up writing the book Good Services was essentially out of frustration. I spent a very long time working on, shall we say, a lot of very mixed services, some good, some definitely not so good, and being really honest, getting bored of saying the same thing over and over again. Like, you need to make sure that your service is findable. The service needs to set your users' expectations. It needs to be accessible and inclusive. And all of the things that are included in those 15 principles of good service design. So I started to collate these things that I was saying on repeat and tested them. And I published a blog post essentially with those 15 principles, and we ended up with about 2,000 contributors around the world, all chipping in on what they thought a good service was, and iterating and changing those principles over time. They didn't change a huge amount, to be honest, which was quite validating to know that so many other people around the world are saying the same thing as I was. So that's how the 15 principles came about. And essentially, they are the fundamental principles that any service needs to be able to deliver to work well for their users. And that's the reason why they're the principles of good service design, because they will get you to delivering a service that works. What you do to, kind of create a magical, wonderful, standout experience beyond that is completely unique to your service. But those really basic fundamentals of just getting to good are hard enough for most organizations. So that's why I wrote the book Good Services. And I now run a training and coaching and capability building organization called the School of Good Services. And we help all sorts of organizations to essentially build the skills to design and deliver better services.
Because exactly these 15 principles that you have mentioned are those that are at the core of your book, Good Services: How to Design Services That Work. And even though here we covered a little bit what constitutes a good public service, and definitely we will hear more about it when the moment of the conference will come. But the School of Good Services is a rather young organization, no? Because in any case, it was founded pretty recently. How long ago, you said?
2020 when the book first came out. So the book came out on pre-sale in 2019 at Christmas, and its official launch date was February 2020. So if you can cast your mind back to then, there was a lot of other things happening at that time. So yeah, it was an interesting process launching a business and writing and releasing a book at a point when everyone was in lockdown around the world. So it was a really it snowballed really, and there were a lot more readers than I thought there ever would be. And I started very quickly to get photographs of people reading it in their gardens and at home with their dogs and cats. I have a collection of photographs of people putting their dogs and cats next to the book. For some reason, that thing happened. So I think it was it's an idyllic picture. I think it came along at a time when obviously it was incredibly difficult for many people around the world, and I don't want to diminish that, but I think there was a collective pausing to a lot of people's work, and a moment where they were able to reflect on actually perhaps maybe there is a different way of doing things, and perhaps maybe there are some things that we need to pause and really think about in terms of making our services work for our users. And of course, it was a time of massive transition for many services, as a lot of previously face-to-face or over-the-phone services had to switch to being digital very, very quickly. So it was something that was a real honor to be part of supporting by providing these principles to help people to do that quickly and to not have to spend time that they should otherwise be spending doing something else, learning the same things that I've learned for the last 20 years. So.
Could you tell us a little about the path before then? Meaning, could you share maybe like a little bit about your journey into the field of service design, especially within the public sector? What do I mean with that is exactly this path that essentially led you then to become director of design at the UK government. And that maybe somehow could we say that the book is a bit of a moment of like a summary or like culmination or like a taking stock or of what that path had been. But in any case, how did it roll out essentially before and up to the book and the School of Good Services?
Yeah, great question. So my journey into service design, I think, is probably quite emblematic of a lot of people's, in that it is not what I studied at university. When I was studying, there were no courses in service design, and I think even if there were, I probably wouldn't have done them. I studied fine art, and so I spent my time doing all sorts of strange artworks, posing in strange ways and taking photographs of it and doing all sorts of interesting, weird things. So I graduated just in the middle of the first kind of financial crisis in 2008. And I think, like many people who graduated then, we sort of looked around and thought, well, probably a career in the arts is not going to happen anytime soon. So I ended up working for the Tate Gallery, which was, I felt hugely lucky and very, very fortuitous to find a job in a cultural institution at that moment in time when there wasn't a lot of money knocking around in that sector. And I was a writer, first of all, for the magazines and for the guides. And then I ended up being a producer for all of the audiovisual interpretation stuff that happens in the gallery. So it was where I really got very used to the idea of translating really complicated concepts into very simple language for people to understand. And just the joy and benefit of doing that and making things accessible and open. It's a fantastic organization to work for. And that then led me to produce an audio guide one day and to test it in the gallery. And I was sort of testing it over the Wi-Fi wandering around the gallery and looked over to my right to see someone putting up a vinyl sign on the wall that said, "Please don't use your mobile phone." And I thought to myself, hang on a second, this is such a strange situation. Here I am encouraging people to use their mobile phones and to add a layer of, richness and interpretation to the artworks. And here is the rest of the gallery saying, no, don't do that. Don't use your mobile phone. It'll disturb people. So I just, obviously at that moment, thought that I had invented service design, like most people who have these epiphanal moments, and started looking around for places where there were other people who were thinking about designing these experiences really holistically. So I ended up moving into service design and worked at an agency called Seren, then moved on to another agency called Engine Service Design, who are still going, fantastic agency. And then essentially was trying to figure out what to do with my life, what to do with my career. Was really open to the idea of being in an organization and going beyond what felt like sometimes quite superficial engagements with organizations where you chuck a PowerPoint deck over the wall and all sorts of other things. So that's how I ended up going into government. And I remember joining on my first day and essentially being the only service designer at Government Digital Service and being told that that was my job to design all of the services. Which, yeah, I mean, right, do that tomorrow, sure. Okay. So I spent obviously a little while trying to do that and then failing and realizing that actually we needed to develop more of a strategy of building capability, bringing people in, helping people to understand actually how to go beyond kind of digitization of services and just taking the existing forms and putting them on the internet. And so, yeah, I was there for 7 years. And in that time, my role evolved from being, kind of poor, lonely service designer on my own to running this community of 2,000 people across government, a mixture of, kind of user researchers, designers, content designers, service designers. And my job was to really provide all of the tools and support, community, design systems, training, performance platforms, data monitoring, service standards that community and the wider government community needed in order to design and deliver better services. So, it's a potted history of my career.
But I haven't, just the question that comes to mind right away on this, which is, I mean, from 1 to 2000, let's say, it means that in any case there has been quite a pickup, let's say, in terms of attention and also adoption and also care, actually, for the topic of service design. No, so what happened there? In the sense, what did you notice, or what do you think was the dynamic, let's say, that explains the fact that service design came to become, if we may put it this way, so important and also so well regarded, let's say, from when you started to when you then left the UK government?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I should say, first of all, there were other types of design within government at that moment in time. So GDS had a strong design community of interaction designers and graphic designers. And across government, there were people who were in pockets doing service design. And there was also a very small but quite nascent and important group of designers, mostly from an interaction design point of view, who had already started to come together. And that kind of initiative was started by some fantastic designers at GDS, no less Ben Terrett, who was the previous head of design before I joined. So I was almost the kind of next wave of how do we take what was, some really fantastic progress in making government services visually consistent, making sure that they worked properly, making sure that they were on the internet, to how do we start to bring together those things across organizational silos? How do we actually start to go beyond that kind of interface level to design policies and systems and processes and ways of working to deliver those services? So my job was really kind of moving that into that next phase. And I think there was an appetite. And I think there was also a sense of frustration that that people who had already wanted to work in this way, and mostly I would say people from a sort of policy and operational business point of view, had seen this kind of massive initiative to, kind of get their services into a digital space, and seen that had not necessarily been as holistic and inclusive of all of those other more strategic things that they wanted to talk about. So they felt excluded from that kind of government digital movement to some extent, and they wanted to be part of it. So I remember looking around at various different products that were happening at Government Digital Service at the time, and thinking to myself that there needs to be something to bring these things together as a support package, and basically to provide Government Digital Service as a service back to government to help them to transform their services. So that was when I wrote a really ranty blog post, actually, about how we need to move beyond just the interface level, and we need to think about whole services. And a wonderful person called Janet Hughes read it. She's now the director, I think, of transformation at the Department of Environment and Rural Affairs, and a fantastic person. Read it and went, Lou, this isn't a blog post, this is a business case. You should write it as a business case, and you should put that to basically the Cabinet Office and Treasury, and you should ask for some money to invest in whole services and to bring these things together. So it did, and I took it to the then head of the civil service, who was John Manzoni at the time, who kind of looked over at the desk and said, "Ooh, this all sounds very dangerous," with a sort of weird twinkle in his eye, which was quite interesting. And anyway, gave me the money to carry on and to do that, which was, a really quite a wild moment in my career. I never thought that I would kind of go from basically designing services to running a massive, kind of £5 million program of all of these products and all of these people and all of these standards. But that was what was needed in order to be able to actually truly transform those services. It's not just about bringing service designers in, it's about supporting them with all of the other things that they need to be able to do that work.
I have a question on this last thing that you mentioned, which is like you didn't think, let's say, that it would get from that point to what it in the end, what in the end happened and what in the end turned out to be. What do you think instead that, for example, the version of you who had just graduated and was like looking for jobs in fine arts, what would you say that version of you would say, let's say, to you today, seeing all this path? Because this topic is something that I've been, it's a bit of a personal question maybe, but it's something that I personally myself have been reflecting on a little bit lately, because sometimes I just think, even like in certain like specific moments, I think, okay, but if, let's say, 18, 19 years old me just graduated from high school in not even university, and just high school, like from South of Italy, would meet me now, like what would it say? And ask me simply, so what's up? What's been up in the past 11, 12 years? Like, how have we been doing, let's say? Then the Lou of fine arts, let's say, who saw that that problem, let's say, that bottleneck, we may call it this way, and then did all of this path, like today, what would they think of Lou 2024, let's say?
I mean, I think
you're not running for president of the US, by the way.
No, I mean, this is a great question. This is such a good question, Federica. Thank you. I think they would be surprised, for sure. I definitely don't think this is a career that I expected myself to go into. I always, at school, thought that design was just about making things look nice, because that's what we were taught. It was about designing a kitchen. In fact, I remember in one of my high school classes designing possibly the worst kitchen I've ever seen. So design was never something about making the world a better place. There was never a higher purpose to design, and I think that's why I always shied away from it. And it felt very restrictive. It felt about taking packaging or an environment and making that thing better. Whereas for me, art felt like possibly the widest brief that I could possibly have. And for me, art was always about making the world a better place through, giving people the space to think about things and to question things and to see the patterns in the world. And I still love art for that reason. But I think I realized that actually it's a very inefficient way of doing that. You know, first of all, someone has to come into the gallery in the first place or see that artwork. Second of all, they have to have that kind of epiphanal moment where they look at that artwork and they cast aside everything that they've, all of the bad bus journey it took to get there, and the fact that they're looking forward to lunch and everything else, and to make space to kind of think about that thing in the way that you thought about it. And that, of course, is just extremely inefficient if you want to make the world a better place. So I think that's why I ended up jumping ship to design, because I saw it as a much better way of doing that. And I think actually there are a lot of designers who are in this space. And, I can think of people like Mike Montero, for example, who, are solely focused on design as a way of improving the world. And I think that is why I wrote Good Services, because I wanted to shortcut that for people. I wanted to allow people to get to the ability of being able to make their services have a positive impact on the world faster, more cheaply, more easily than I saw them being able to do that at the moment. So yeah.
And I would say that I did have a kind of a similar understanding, if not, maybe not understanding, but a similar view, let's say, of design and the discipline of design applied to services. First of all, because I would say that up to a certain age, maybe like 23, 24, I was not even, let's say 23. I was not even like really considering, let's say, design as an aspect or a discipline of service delivery, or of like public service delivery, let's say. But then the way for me to start realizing that was the fact that obviously with adult age, it comes also the moment where you start accessing and using more and more services independently. And so at that point, obviously, you see what are the things that work, what are the things that make you waste time, and what are the things instead that can simply be made simpler. Simply be made simpler. It's really just that, or like more accessible, not just exactly for those who are maybe a bit more versed in using devices or the internet or whatever, but in any case, the fact that indeed services, and especially public services, must be accessible, not just to the many, but to the most, if not to all, let's say. This was, for example, a topic that we did explore partly last year in last year's e-governance conference with Marcus Klar, talking about the fact that services cannot be designed in a boardroom, but you have to interact with the people who use them. This actually connects me to the topic of from usage to actual design. So what do I mean with that is, if you were to reflect on your personal experiences, could you maybe share like a case or an instance where a public service, so not the case of the exhibition, but a public service somehow impacted you or changed your perspective on service design? And how has that somehow, informed also your approach to designing and redesigning services?
Yeah, great question. So I feel like the one that really springs to mind, which I'm sure will have people going, well, obviously, is actually gov.uk. So gov.uk already existed by the time that I joined Government Digital Service, and the design of it, I think, really helped me to understand that when we think and talk about service design, we're not just talking about those big, high-level strategic aspects of it, like, what is the service trying to achieve, and how is the organization structured, and all of these things that as service designers we're very used to thinking about. It's also about how those things get articulated and delivered in reality that shape that overall function. And as designers, we're taught that, form follows function. And of course it should do. You should design something to work for the function that you've defined it through. But also in gov.uk, I saw that the form of something also defines its function as well. And so if you design something well, you can truly change how people use it. And, the perfect example of this is the graphic design of gov.uk, because, this was by and large created by a fantastic designer called Mark Hurrell, who did really wonderful things like, creating a font size that was larger than the average font size to stop civil servants from writing so much. That is such a simple thing to do to your website because, of course, at that point in time, everyone wanted stuff to be above the fold because no one believed that anyone scrolled down a website. So he just made the font bigger to stop people from writing so much. And I was like, that is absolutely genius. That is truly such a simple intervention, so fantastic. And again, riffing off the font point as well, that font is a font called New Transport, which is a digital recut of the font that was designed by Margaret Calvert and Jock Kinnear for the motorway signage here in the UK. And it was accessibility tested in the 1970s, hugely, basically by printing off those signs, strapping them to the top of a car and driving that car at 70 miles an hour towards a crowd of people and asking them to record when they could read that font. And of course, you've got a font that's incredibly legible and accessible and readable to people who are driving down the motorway, who are very stressed with low legibility. That's exactly the same scenario and situation that people are in when they're accessing gov.uk. They're stressed, they're on a mobile phone more often than not. It's early in the morning when they're applying for their visa or something else. They have exactly the same accessibility requirements as someone who's driving at 70 miles an hour down a motorway. So these sorts of graphic design interventions into gov.uk that are so successful because you don't notice them, it really changed my understanding about service design, that, it is absolutely about everything from what someone sees and how that works to the systems and processes and policies that sit in the background, and all of those things have to be connected. It isn't just about saying, well, how something looks and how it works is someone else's job. It absolutely isn't. Those things have to be connected. So yeah, I think gov.uk is the thing that really, and still I would say is because it is always evolving, is constantly changing my understanding of service design.
Also because at some point, even though I was not living in the UK, or I had no need, let's say, to access services from the UK government, at the same time, I remember that, for example, when I was typing the name of a certain service or something that I had to do on Google, and I was not in the UK, one of the top results was almost always a page of the website of the UK government where there was a very nice explanation of how this service worked. The problem is that it was an explanation of how it worked in the UK. So I was not in the UK. But otherwise, love the experience of that and love the experience of accessing that information. But since we talked about the good public services, what do you think that instead, and this is actually the second last thing that I would like to ask you in this podcast episode. We're getting towards the end, but we spoke a lot about good examples and good solutions. But what are instead, in your opinion, the most common pitfalls, let's say, in public service design, and how can they be avoided?
Gosh, that's a big old question, isn't it? We could probably carry on for a couple of days talking about that. Maybe I'll just summarize the top ones. So I think the most common problems that I see in organizations who struggle to deliver good services, and I would extend this to not just the public sector, but to every other organization, because we all struggle actually with very similar things. The first one is that we don't know or can't connect with or can't empathize with who our users actually are. And often, particularly in the public sector context, that is because our users are forced to use our service. They don't have a choice. So we think that we don't need to design something that works well for them because they have no choice anyway. Or they're a particularly contentious group. So, for example, people who are being admitted into the prison system, who we socially, morally, for various different reasons, again, don't really feel like we can talk about user needs in that context. Or we've just simply over time kind of separated ourselves from them because, we're over here in this building, kind of far away from them, and their lives are so unbelievably different to ours. It becomes very difficult for us to empathize and understand them. So that's the number one problem, is that we just don't know who our users are. We struggle to understand them, and that connection has been lost. The second thing that kind of feeds off of that, though, is that we then, because of that, don't know actually what our services are. And that might sound like a really strange thing to say, but our understanding as an organization of what our services are is usually a collection of systems and processes and tools that are often very, very small and quite isolated and quite siloed. What we don't see is how those things get used by our users to achieve much larger end goals. So something like, for example, coming to the UK and staying requires you to interact with probably about 25 different teams across about 6 or 7 different bits of government, everything from your right to rent to your visa application to your national insurance number that allows you to work. So not seeing our services from the same perspective of our users means that we just don't understand what those services are. And I always like to say that we don't get to decide what those services are, our users do, by what they're looking to achieve, because they're the ones who are typing it into Google, who are looking for that thing, or asking a friend or colleague. And if they can't find your service, then it may as well not exist. And the last one that I would say here that's truly, truly connected to this is that we don't remember why we're providing that service in the first place, which again might sound like a really strange thing to say, but very often, particularly in the public sector, those policy outcomes, those objectives were written many, many years ago, and we have become so focused on how we deliver the service that we don't talk about why we're doing it. So when it comes to really radical transformation and realizing what that service needs to be with new technology or work in a different way, we struggle to understand what that service should be delivering and what good looks like, because we just don't remember what the original purpose of that service is, and we don't talk about it anymore. So yeah, 3 things: not knowing who your users are, not knowing what your services are, and not remembering why you're delivering that service are a kind of toxic triangle that we need to get ourselves out of.
I would say now that maybe we can close. I know that we have already 15 points on this topic, and we have potentially many more. And those are all to keep for the e-governance conference that is coming up in May. But if you were, for example, to mention then 3 non-negotiables, let's say, 3 non-negotiable elements that every public service at this point must have in order to be considered well designed. Before you said that, yes, you can design your own unique path, let's say, to accessing a certain service within a certain government environment or a certain country. But there are some things, there is a baseline that has to be there.
I think the first one is that it helps a user to achieve the outcome that they're trying to achieve, right? So, they're trying to get a decision on whether or not they can come to the UK and stay. They are trying to understand if they can get access to a pension. So, first of all, help them to achieve that end goal. If we're not helping them to do that, then, really that is a service that's not working. The second most important thing I would say is that the service is easy to find. Which again sounds really obvious, but if we're going to call it something like the Form V111 or the statutory off-road vehicle notification, and our users don't know what that thing is already before they start looking for it, again, we can build the best service in the world, but if they can't find it, then there's no point in designing it. So thinking about the naming and the framing of that service is really important. The third thing is much more internal, and that has to do with giving our teams the freedom and time and money and permission to be able to listen and learn from user research and to be able to put that into action and actually design services consciously, rather than have them happen as an accidental byproduct of other decisions that we make in our organization, like technology decisions or political decisions. So consciously designing services means enabling our teams to do that, giving them the money and space and time and permission. So that would be the third thing I would say. And if you can just do those things, you're halfway there.
Lou, thanks a lot for joining us today. It was, as expected, super interesting. And I'm sure it's going to be even more interesting for even more people at the conference in May. So in the meantime, thanks a lot for joining us today.
Thank you.
So to recap, this was Lou Down, who is the director of the School of Good Services, author of Good Services, the relative book, and at the same time, a former director of design at the UK government. While instead, this is a memo for all of you that you need to go online at 2024.egovconference.ee, where you can find all information exactly about the upcoming e-governance conference, which is going to take place between May 21st and May 23rd in Tartu, in Estonia, physically, but also in a hybrid format, as usual for the past few years, also online. So you'll be able to find there all information about the speakers, the program, the tickets, and also the links to eventually connect online if you, for whatever reason, cannot make it to Estonia. That is it also from my side, though. And as your host, the only thing that is left for me to say is, first of all, to have a nice day, and then to join us for the next episode of the Digital Government Podcast. We will keep introducing the speakers of the conference and have more sessions like this. So see you soon.
This podcast is brought to you by the eGovernance Academy. Tune in next time.